Hello and thanks for joining. This is Jane Ann Perkins and I'm going to be giving you a quick tutorial on the org charts in Visio 2016, Visio Office 365 version. This is also a wizard that will help you with other versions in Visio. So this should apply to prior versions of Visio. We're going to work primarily on layouts, making an org chart fit on one page, and then also how you can break a large org chart across multiple pages and have those connected to the main org chart in what's called synchronized pages. I'm going to start with the org chart wizard just so people can see how that looks and how easy it is. And I do have the wizard opened here from Visio. You can get to this the Visio org chart wizard by going to the File New tab and just clicking on a blank org chart. Many Visio people have already seen this step, so we're going to go ahead and click Next here. And we're going to use an Excel file that already exists, and I've already navigated to that Excel file through the Browse tool. And we are also going to use several photos for the people inside the organization, so we're going to have that file already in this wizard as well. One of the steps here in this org chart wizard is to make sure you do have the column fields from the Excel database to sync up with Visio's understanding of the name of the person from the organization as well as who they report to. And then you have a field for the first name option. But what's most important is to make sure that the columns and fields from Excel match up appropriately for the name of the person in the organization as well as who they report to. And then we'll go ahead and make sure those are correct and click Next. And here we show the columns on the left from Excel and how they match up with the fields that Visio has designated, the way that Visio has different options. So it has name, title, and extension. So for instance, we could remove the extension or we could add it, but those are data field columns or data field columns from Excel that we can either have or not have in our shape inside the org chart. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that extension number back. And you could also move these in different positions with the up and down buttons, but we want the name first, the title, and then the extension. And this also shows that it's matching up with the data shape fields as well. And then lastly is that picture file. It's actually going to be, this is actually browsing and locating the folder by which all of the organization pictures are stored, and then the name of the file inside the folder must match the name of the person in the database in order for those pictures to be placed on the right shape for that particular person, right? So we'll go ahead and click Next. And then here's where we're going to let the wizard just automatically break across the pages and show how it's easier to synchronize and create pages within the org chart ribbon inside the Visio application. We're going to go ahead and click Finish. It's going to build the org chart for us, and we'll see that it does indeed break across 3 pages. And we're going to talk about how we can actually take the very nice org chart with the pictures, have it look great for leadership, vice president, and managers on one page, then have the vice presidents on their own pages. And then we're also going to make a 4th page where the entire org chart is on one page without the pictures, because the pictures are going to make it impossible to fit it on one page. Obviously, I say impossible, meaning you could put the font small enough probably and the pictures small enough to maybe literally get it on one page, but it wouldn't be a very readable document, right? So we're going to go ahead and make it very readable, very nice presentation of information with the org charts. We're first going to go ahead and duplicate on the lower left corner page 1. We're going to right click on page 1 and duplicate. That way I have one page. Page 1 is going to be my overall, so it's going to be all. I'm going to double click that, and then this one's going to be just leadership, okay? And then we're going to also have the VP. So first what we'll talk about is how we can actually create a page for each of the VPs, and then we'll see how that will fit nicely on one page, because the VPs we can see there's not so many managers and associates under those managers that it would make it impossible to have it on one page for each vice president. So in this particular case, we'll be able to do it nicely. So we're going to go up to the ribbon where the org chart tab is located, and we're going to see in the lower or in the left corner here of the ribbon the layout group. This layout group is key when it comes to actually fixing the layout, as well as creating synchronized copies in order for those not only to make copies of pulling things from the org chart, right? So we don't have to manually cut and paste. We can actually just create, but we also see a synchronized copy so that if changes are made on any one of the pages, whether it be a name change, an extension number, or a title, that when you update it on one page, it will sync across the other pages. So we're going to go ahead and select the vice president, the first one on the left, and click up here. Now notice when I clicked on the vice president, that synchronize button is now highlighted. Let's go ahead and deselect it, and you'll notice that it's grayed out. So we do need to click on the particular role that's topmost for the synchronized copy, and then we'll go ahead and drop down the arrow, and we can do a couple different things. We're going to create a synchronized copy. Notice the tooltip. Please take time to read these tooltips when you're learning. It will be very helpful for you as you build your skills. So we're going to create a synchronized copy that takes those large sections and puts them on a different page. So we'll go ahead and click on that. It does give us a choice to do a new page or an existing page, and then we also can have the hide subordinates on original pages if we'd like to do that. But in this case, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just select new page and click OK. And you're going to see the vice president is now nicely placed on a second page, and it's called page 3. So we're just going to call this VP1. We could name it, but we'll just call it VP1 for now. And then leadership, we're going to go back to that leadership page, and we're going to make this vice president number 2, John Marshall. We'll put him on a synchronized copy as well as all of his subordinates. And so now on page 4, we have a nice, beautiful org chart of the vice president with his 4 managers and their subordinates. So we're going to go ahead and then double click on that page 4 and type in VP2. And now we're going to go ahead and just notice that both of the VP sheets have a lot of spacing to fill up, that you could have a little bit more, the size could be stretched out a little bit. So there's some neat features in the org chart ribbon that allows you to increase the spacing. And we don't really have to select anything at this point. We just can click increase spacing, and we'll see that when we do that, it just moves everything down a little bit. So we can do that a little bit more. Now notice, as soon as I did that, it created a second page. Now getting rid of the second page can be a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click undo, and then this is a perfect opportunity to talk about the auto fit button, which is inside the design ribbon. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later also, but the auto fit or auto size button, I should say, is inside the design ribbon, and it's always turned on by default. Okay, so I created this from scratch, right? I did the wizard, you guys watched me, and this auto size button is on. It's gray, meaning it's like it's turned on, right? So if I click it once more, it turns it off, right? So we see that it's off. Now let's go ahead and do that spacing one more time and see what happens if I click increase spacing again. What happens is we can see that the org chart goes off the page a bit, but it's also not centered perfectly from left to right, right? So at this point, I can move the vice president over a bit to center it side to side, right? So now it's centered, and I didn't have to mess with that page. That's very important when you are rearranging or moving spacing around to do that. We'll add a header at this point on the design ribbon. So let's go ahead and add a header. And if we move down the vice president just a hair, we should still be good. All right, you also can use your arrow key on the keyboard to kind of nudge it a little bit. So the mouse is sometimes a little tricky. So using your arrow keys, bottom arrow or left and right or top arrow on the keyboard will help you to kind of nudge that org chart. And you just have to select the topmost leader of the org chart that you want to move. And then you don't have to select the entire org chart. So that looks lovely. We're going to go ahead and go back to VP1 and do the same thing on the design ribbon. We'll add a border, or I guess you could say a borders and title, a header and a footer. You can change those, of course, later. And we're going to add some spacing here. And again, that's on the org chart tab. We're going to increase some spacing. And it looks great. So now let's go back to our leadership page and let's figure out how we could actually hide subordinates. And since we already have a nice representation of the VP 1 and 2 and all of the managers associated, I'd like to have a leadership page with the president, the vice president, and the managers on just one page. And then, like I said, we'll have one that has everyone without the pictures. But with this, I'd like to have the pictures, same format, and we're going to go ahead and just remove the managers, or excuse me, we're going to remove the subordinates of all of the managers by selecting the managers and then clicking the Hide Subordinates button. And that's in the Arrange group, and it's grayed out until we select a manager. And I'm going to select a couple managers at the same time by using my Control key for the second, third, and fourth manager. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Hide Subordinates. Now you'll notice that those 4 managers all have their subordinates hidden, and there's a bunch of white space, which is going to throw some of you off. No problem. We are going to do a quick fix on that later when we finish hiding the subordinates down below. So we're going to click on this manager, use the Control key, second manager, Control key again, holding that down, and then we're going to select the third manager. With those 3 managers selected, I will click Hide Subordinates, and now we have all, what is it, 7 managers, right? So now at this point we can do a wonderful thing called Relayout. What that does is it says, okay, we've hidden these subordinates, now do a relayout. It doesn't really change the actual layout, it just says with the current layout position, put it all back together where those spaces are then hidden, right, and are taken away. So now we just have a nice representation of the president and vice president. At this point, we could actually make the vice president and some different layouts here, but let's go ahead and just click on the topmost and make sure that we have a side-by-side look. And we could also do the layout of maybe something else. You can play with the layout a little bit here on your side-by-side. And it looks like that looks pretty good, but I'd like the lower subordinates of the 2 VPs to be a little bit more spaced out to utilize this space on the left and right sides. So we can click on the vice president and we can choose to do a layout of just the left and right vice presidents. And that kind of makes it there. Now we can use some spacing to increase some spacing. What happens is sometimes when I do that, relayout, the spacing gets a little wonky. It's not too bad. I can move the president over a little bit and it doesn't really move it back to. So sometimes it gets a little bit funny, but I think that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and add that design borders and title that we picked for the other pages. And at this point we can probably move it down and maybe shrink up the spacing. Notice because now this auto size or auto fit, I guess auto size button is on. If I had moved down any further I would have gotten a second page. So let's turn that button off. I actually have it on my quick access toolbar as well, but I'm going to turn it off here. And at this point I'm going to go ahead and take the spacing up just a hair, and then I think we'll be pretty good. And again, if we want to ever lay out anything, we can always mess with the side-by-side look again, or change those aspects. You can do this probably all day long, right? That looks a little bit more centered now, but I'm going to go ahead and bring this one to be more consistent. So it's looking pretty good. Now let's go ahead and talk about getting everything, all of them on one page. So how can we do that? A couple things we need to do is talk about how to remove the pictures and then change the style. So first I'm going to change the style, and that's in the org chart ribbon. There's a style gallery. If you don't see this gallery, you might see the button called Quick Styles inside the org chart ribbon, probably in the shapes group. So we're going to go ahead and click on the second style, and that will kind of shrink everything up a bit, puts the names in their own box with the VPs, and makes kind of the wording and lettering, the fonts, to be somewhat equal and not distinct as they were like in a ribbon before. We're also going to then talk about how to remove the pictures. And I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we don't really remove them permanently, but just hide them. In the picture group, there's 4 icons. Nothing is actually selected, or it's all grayed out. It's not highlighted because nothing's selected to hide or show as far as pictures. So if we clicked on just the president and we clicked show hide, it would just or hide or delete the president. But we'd like to have all of them hidden. So we'll go ahead and select all, which is Control+A on the keyboard, and then we're going to click the hide button. Now we've got all the pictures hidden, and we're going to go ahead and go to home and get that font increased right away. So I'd like that to be a little bit stronger font. We also can talk about how we can shrink up or decrease the size in the org chart ribbon of the actual shapes. All right, so we can go ahead, and we don't really have to have everything selected for that. We can just go to the org chart, and we can then click on the width of up here in the ribbon, and it will then decrease the width of all of the shapes. All right, so we're just going to decrease the width depending on your font size, right? You can then scroll through a little bit to make sure you haven't lost anybody's names. All right, so looking better, right? So let's go ahead and talk about layouts. In the layout group, let's go ahead and pick the horizontal layout here, which it was already selected, but I selected it again with art to kind of have that to be the one I want on topmost. Then I'm going to talk about how I can change the vice president's subordinates, and very similar to what I did over on the leadership page. But in this case, I'd like to change it so that I see more of the different kind of layout for the next group, and that's called a button over here in the layout group. There's a little area, and I'm just going to highlight it here on the screen, and it's called the dialog box launcher for the layout group. If we click that, it's called Arrange Subordinates. Now this is your handy tool for actually getting everything on one page. So we're going to go ahead and select Amy, which we have that selected. We open up the Arrange dialog box, and we're going to say we'd like Amy's to have the managers laid out more of in a block fashion here, where it's all 4, and then in more of a horizontal versus vertical, and then the manager's subordinates will have in a vertical format. So you can have different types of formats throughout your org chart in order to get it on one page. So we're going to go ahead and click on then this icon, which is the horizontal, putting Amy's and her managers underneath her in that format. So I'll click OK. What happens is, of course, she only has 3. I think John has 4. So what's beautiful is immediately it shoots it off, right? So we've got arts, this is more of a block, right, layout, horizontal, I guess, and it's more of a block center, horizontal center. And then Amy's is different, right? But it's harder to do it in this layout, so I chose to go to the Arrange Subordinates command. Now I'm going to do the same thing with John. I got to cancel that box. I'm going to click John and select the layout dialog box to get to the Arrange Subordinates. Now I really would love Microsoft to add this particular button right in the layout group. Very, very important. People miss this step. I missed this step. This was painful for me to find. It's kind of hidden. So, and really anything up here that would be helpful. I think that would be great if Microsoft could do that. So look for that maybe change if you're a 365 subscriber. Look for those improvements in the future. All right, so now we're going to say, John, we'd like his to shoot going to be a horizontal layout, shooting his managers right below him in a horizontal fashion. Now what happens is, what happened, right? We have that again, each page has that design ribbon, that auto size button. Now I've right-clicked and added to my I've added it to my quick access toolbar. So that's why I see it's there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the undo button twice, okay? And then I'm going to turn off the auto size button, and now I'm going to do the John Marshall again. So I'll go back to that org chart. We're going to click on that dialog box launcher to get to the Arrange Subordinates, and we're going to say we'd like to do a horizontal layout for the John's subordinates. And then now we don't have that second page to deal with. we still have this one to deal with, which we'll talk about how we can fix that. But what's nice is you don't have to have additional pages going right, left, and top, bottom if you start to really work with your org chart. Now, lastly, we're going to then have to shrink up a bit, right? We need to kind of shrink up the sizing here. And we also want to add like that design and title. So let's go ahead and add the design title like we did earlier. We want to do that, and that will help us to kind of get an idea of how much space we have. So it looks like we're doing good top to bottom. Being on one page, we still need to shrink it up. So that's where we're going to go to the org chart ribbon, and we're going to decrease the spacing. Now I think I could actually decrease my font, and then also shrink up the size a bit. But at this point, we're just about close. Now I'm going to go ahead and decrease the font just by a hair. So this is where you do play with it a tiny bit. Decrease the font, and then I'm also going to go back to my org chart and I'm going to decrease the width. And then when I do that, I need to then decrease my spacing again. And I'm finally now on one page. So I hope this has been a helpful tutorial. Oops, one more thing here is we need to get rid of this second page. And I've researched this heavily. It's not easy to do because a lot of the documentation online is talking about the pages down here, right, on the bottom. What I'm talking about is how to get rid of that blank page there. Well, it's really a sizing thing, right? Even though we started with really an 8.5 by 11 landscape, which I haven't really discussed, but that's the default, right, is 8.5 by 11, and it did default to landscape for me on the orientation. Actually, it looks like it's in portrait. So we could change that to landscaping, and then we have all sorts of problems there with that. So, but we're going to go ahead and change the size to letter. And again, that auto size is not on, so you might start to see some of this weird effect where your org chart is literally in the gray area. So this is the consequence of making sure that we have that auto size button off. You know, those are some of the drawbacks to it. But I'm going to go ahead and just fit that to page. I also want to just remind you that if you're working with it, sometimes using best fit to page helps too. One of the problems with that is that the program doesn't realize I added a header and a border at the top. So that's probably an improvement Microsoft is working on right now as we speak. But at this point, what's nice is that going to the design ribbon, having auto size off, and then reminding that it's an 8.5 by 11 sheet, that command right there will actually reset everything to be just one page, especially if you've already got your org chart to be fitting on one page. Then you have to come back to this command. And I hope this has been a helpful tutorial and getting you to your org charts to look wonderful and fit on one page. And thanks for joining. This is Jane Ann Perkins.